Hello, welcome to Football Geeks podcast. My guest today is an authority on Latin American football, and it's a knowledge he's transposed into a superb new book, Big Boots to Fill, which, as well as charting Argentina's 30-year search for the new Maradona, serves as a chronology of Argentinian football dating back from the 1920s to the present day. It gives me great pleasure to welcome David Nolan. David,
Hello.
Good evening.
How you doing?
I'm very well, mate. Very well. Well, I've read the book, and it's brilliant researched and hugely detailed. It's a great piece of work, mate. So, congratulations on that. But I mean, the first leading question, it's probably a mundane question to ask, but what inspired your interest in this particular subject, mate?
I guess I'm Irish, so growing up in the 1980s, early 80s, my first couple of World Cups were 82 and 86. Obviously, Ireland had no presence. Northern Ireland were there, and they were kind of my team in a way. But the team I really sort of fell in love with when I was young were like Brazil and Argentina. And South American football had a magic and a mystique to it that no other football I'd ever seen had. And you could see it in the way commentators talked about it. You could see it in the summary. It was the kits. It was the haircuts. I'm sure you're kind of probably around my age, and you've kind of had a similar experience. I think a lot of people of our generation did.
Yeah.
And I still remember the Brazil 82 team was kind of the best team I've ever seen. You know what I mean? With kind of an awe. But at the same time, I was buying Shoot and Match magazines. And I remember I kind of thought, who's the best player in the world? And it was Pele was still mentioned then. Nobody had kind of risen up to take that, that space of being a generational player. And I didn't really know who Cruyff was. I was a bit too young, I suppose. And I saw a thing that said Maradona. And I didn't know who he was. I'd never heard of him. It said he's the best player in the world. It was a black and white photograph of him with his big, black hair, like hurdling a tackle, and that kind of name stuck in my head. And then 82 World Cup, I kind of thought, I was 7. I was just the right age to be in love with the player. And then Maradona had a kind of a terrible World Cup. You know what I mean? It didn't go to plan, but I still kind of thought, wow, he's cool. There was just something about him. The fact that that Brazil team went out of their way to kick him. You know what I mean? So I was kind of in love with Maradona, Argentinian football. And from then on, they were kind of always my other team. Like Ireland qualified for World Cups, but I always kept an eye on Argentina. And back then, it was really hard to follow the Argentinian game, from Europe. You'd see little things in the newspaper and World Soccer. You couldn't hope to watch any games. Once the internet arrived and we could suddenly watch games from all over the world and there were highlights, it was amazing. I could actually watch, the teams I'd read about for years and kind of follow the league as well as I could. Easier, in a way, than following like the Premier League or Irish football. So it's kind of grown as I've grown, and I've kind of been in love with Argentinian football now for since I was a little kid. So there's still, if Ireland play Argentina, I feel a little bit torn.
Oh, really?
It's a weird thing to say, but it's true. And I've been to a few Ireland-Argentina games, and I want Ireland to win. But at the same time, if Argentina play Argentinian football, I'm like, yay.
I must say, I've got this kind of affection for Argentina because my first World Cup predates yours by 4 years. It was 1978. So, and Maradona was almost selected for that squad at the age of 17. He was a phenomenal talent coming through at Argentinos juniors. So, but I just remember the thing I loved about Argentinian football in that World Cup. I think that Carlos Menotti referred to it as suicide football. It was played on a knife edge, and there was this kind of desperation to win, which I think that the Latin teams carry into the game more than the kind of any other kind of continent in the world. There is this kind of it's like, if we don't win, we're going to die. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's amazing, and that final, I was completely hooked. My favourite player, funnily enough, was Robbie Rensenbrink, who was on the other side. But I loved Argentina as well, and being an impressionable 8-year-old at the time, and seeing the colour of that final. The kind of the blue and the white.
Perfect.
And then you got the kind of orange of the Dutch, and it wasn't a great game, but it was a brilliant final. There was, wasn't it? Controversy and these crazy moments and the crowd, and it was fantastic. Yeah. Anyway, I'm taking over the talk, but I've asked you to compile like 5 number 10s that really tell the story of Argentina's kind of obsession with that number 10 role, haven't I?
Yeah.
So let's start this potted history of the Argentinian obsession with the creative midfielder by talking about your first choice, which was La Maquina.
La Maquina, from the 1940s in River Plate. So if you know your Argentine football, River Plate have got this reputation for playing attractive football. I suppose the closest English equivalent would be Tottenham. I mean, the fans demand it. They play a cultured, attacking, beautiful game. And that kind of started really with La Máquina. They had 5 amazing players at the same time, all in attack. They didn't play all that many games together. If you look at the history books, they only played together, I think, about 20 times, something like that. But over a few years, the 2 that I would say are kind of the closest to number 10 were inside forwards. So that's a position that doesn't exist anymore, really. But it's kind of playing off the wing and into the hole, as in the modern game, it would be like. And they were Moreno, Manuel Moreno, and not Adolfo Pedernera. And the problem is I haven't seen much of them because there's not much footage, obviously, from the 1940s. But what little footage there is Pedernera is kind of a schemer. You know what I mean? He'd use space well. He was like one who'd pick out passes. He was really clever, kind of a tactical footballer. And his nickname was El Maestro, which makes sense. So you can see that in the later number 10s that came for a couple we're going to talk about later on. One of them in particular was kind of that kind of player. And then Moreno was more of a burly, dribbly, powerful surgeon player who scored a ridiculous amount of goals, great in the air. And he had that other Argentinian attributes of being a bit controversial off the pitch. He was like a drinker. He smoked. He talked about tango as a training technique instead of going to actual training. He had been a boxer and he was not afraid to defend himself. He said ridiculous things in public. He was kind of dashing, had a moustache. So that kind of romanticism of Argentinian football was kind of present in him. But they played together with a couple of other amazing players. And back then, when there wasn't an actual number 10, the number 10 was the left winger. And both of those players wore that shirt at different times. So the number 10 role and its kind of mystique in Argentina started to evolve in that period. And they had a couple of historic thrashings of Chacarita Juniors to beat 5-1, I think, or 6-1 in a game, which is kind of still talked about in odd terms, you know, there's any footage of it. But mainly they're remembered for just the beauty of the play. And again, you're talking about knife edge football, just attacking and 5 players barreling forward, like picking out passes, doing nutmegs and flipping the ball over people's heads, etc. The kind of stuff that we kind of didn't see in Europe until the Hungarian team, really. They were doing it in Argentina and Uruguay at the time. And that was kind of the start of that. People fall in love with that position and kind of it becoming something special. And then I've kind of a little sidebar a few years later, Omar Savori kind of also emerged at River Plate. He ended up playing in Italy and for Italy, but he was similar. He was like, you know, he was from the barrio. He was like dark haired, small, unbelievable dribbler, tough, scored goals, could pick a pass. And that was kind of a heritage beginning at River Plate at the time. It's funny that later on it became Boca Juniors, really, that were associated with the number 10. But originally and kind of in between, it was River Plate.
Yeah. And Savori went to he played alongside John Charles, didn't he?
Big man, little man. Yeah,
that's it. That's the definitive kind of big man, little man, isn't it? Yeah. So, that's great. And also like Alfredo Di Stefano played for River Plate along in that period.
He came in as a youngster at the end of that period, and then Argentinian football, because of the economy after the war, kind of lost a lot of money. In Colombia suddenly had a lot of money in its football league, so a lot of the players had to go to Colombia and played for Millonarios. So Di Stefano among them. They were supposedly the greatest team in the world at the time because they had about 3 Argentinians, I think, orchestrating their attack, and including Moreno went there and played, and apparently was amazing there as well. So yeah, they started. Even back then, Argentina was exporting its number 10s, which became obviously a kind of a feature of the game.
Yeah. So we're going to move forward a fair chunk of time because obviously this is the big subject of your book, which is of course Diego. He's so let's talk about Diego. There's a lot of ground to cover, obviously, but where did it all start for Diego Armando Maradona?
Well, I think you mentioned already, like Argentinos Juniors. He was a phenomenon from a really young age. So if you go on YouTube, you'll still see the footage of him as a little boy, juggling a ball in his barrio, basically. And even then, people were talking about him having like a kind of special level of skill. And so when he emerged, you don't often see that level of skill translate to, adult football, but with Maradona, it absolutely did. His first game, one of his first moments was to nutmeg an established player, and it was celebrated. Argentina does have a really good knack of turning things into myth in football. They romanticize things as they're happening. So La Máquina is a good example of that. Team is mythologized. And Maradona, as his career was happening, they were already kind of mythologizing him. And he did things that made it easy. He did ridiculous things. He scored like goals against River Plate, like spectacular goals. He performed dribbles that shouldn't have been. Nobody should be able to do them. And if you watched him, like as you did, and I did when he was in his prime, I've never seen anything like him. And he showed that at Argentina. So he got a massive record-breaking transfer to Boca Juniors, who was the club he'd supported and are kind of the Argentinian club really alongside River. And he was never properly successful there in a way. He had issues with management, but he still had like an amazing highlight reel of amazing football. But at the same time, he was already starting to have problems. He had his management had kind of copyrighting his image and trying to make money out of him. So the kind of stuff that became part of his legacy, the problems off the pitch, were already there in Argentina, and only kind of got worse and bigger when he got to Europe a few years later.
Yeah, I know. We as you say, the kind of there's back then there's like a paucity of stuff you could watch.
Yeah.
As you said, most of my kind of interest in Latin American football came from the pages of World Soccer.
World Soccer,
Yeah, but yeah. So Diego, yeah, he. I mean, I saw a particular goal he scored against River Plate in a game where it was kind of ankle deep in mud, and he's kind of danced his way through kind of like two defenders and left Filial on his backside, and then just rolled the ball into the net. So
legendary goal.
Yeah, that's one of the great kind of real moments, isn't it? So we'll move. I mean, my the first time I saw him was like there were two very significant games in Britain that he played, and there was the Argentina game against Scotland where he completely mesmerised Scotland and tore them apart, and then there was the game against England where he did very much the same. But they were on the lead, they were on the losing side, but his performance was just one that and that was like you say, you didn't see much from Argentina at that point, but that was where you thought, looked at it, and you thought, my God, this player is definitely something special. And then, of course, there was the 1982 World Cup. So, what do you think went wrong there, David? What do you think happened at the 82 World Cup?
82?
Yeah.
Obviously, you might have covered this before on the show, but the big divide in Argentine football between Menotti and Bilardo and the two types of football. So, Menotti was the coach of Argentina in '78, and he coached an amazing Hurricane squad to winning the title, and his teams played like short passing, high speed attacking football, which is really good to watch. And you would think Maradona should fit into that, but Maradona kind of needed just to be given the ball and let do what he wanted to do, which happened later on. But in '82, he was just another player. He was like an incredibly talented player and a young star, and given the number 10 shirt, but he had to play in the Menotti system. I don't think it really suited. I don't think he wanted to be given like, here's responsibility. You're the man. We'll do whatever you need us to do, which is what happened later on. But in '82, you still had some of the older players from '78 around, big egos, Passarella, Kempes, and Maradona was kind of happened. We'll talk about it later on. Messi, similar thing happened until they kind of let him do what he could do best and just focus on that. It didn't quite work. Also, like he said, he had a terrible World Cup, but he played against Brazil, and that was, I remember the game at the time watching it, and that Brazil team they changed the game for him. They played, when they had the ball, they played like that Brazil team. They were irresistible, but they took turns kicking him. Every time he had the ball, they were kicking him, and he got used to that, I suppose. But World Cup with all that pressure on his shoulders, he couldn't handle it, and he lashed out and got sent off. Which again is just part of the legend now, but at the time it was like, oh my God, he's the best player in the world, and he's kind of blown it against this team. So it was a lot of different things. Also, the Argentinian team had got to 1982 World Cup and found out about the Falklands War while they were in their hotel watching. Like they'd been fed the propaganda in Argentina by the junta. They get to Spain and suddenly they're seeing on the news what's really happening, and they were kind of in shock. I think I've read interviews with them since talking about how they had to deal with that while they were trying to play these games. So many excuses for him. He was also, how old was he in '82? He was 21.
Yeah, 21. Yeah.
That's he's a young player,
isn't it? Yeah,
with a lot of responsibility and weight on his shoulders,
and not fully realised. Yeah, but I mean, 4 years later, it was a completely different story, wasn't it? I mean, he was obviously inspired by a manager who was also a winner, Carlos Bilardo. It's Estudiantes, wasn't it? He was the player the Estudiantes who kicked their way to glory in the 1960s. Anti-football, yeah. But he set up a team that was solid with no shortage of talent, with Diego at the helm, didn't he?
Yeah, like it was so many things came right, didn't they? In that tournament for that team, like You're right. They had no shortage of talent. There was good players around him, but there wasn't another great player really. Maybe Valdano. Yeah, there were really solid players and a couple of gifted players, but Maradona was so far above the rest of the team. He made them all play better, and he had the best few weeks of his life probably. He was fit, which never really happened again for him at like a big tournament. He was always struggling with some injury. He was fit because he had his own fitness trainer who used to get him ready for each season with special. Probably now wouldn't be allowed technique, but it worked for that tournament. And he came in amazing form and kind of played himself into even better form. So he started off well. His confidence grew, the team's confidence grew, and they'd been written off before the tournament. Performance. They kind of peaked in the semis probably against Belgium when he was just ridiculous. His performance. We watched that game back, but watching him as a kid and didn't really appreciate it. He was obviously great and he scored the goals. Then I watched it back recently and I was writing a book and I was like, oh my God. He was just every touch. It was like fantasy football. I mean, like if he wasn't dribbling by two players, he was picking out like ridiculous passes. Like, how did you even see that? Like they couldn't get the ball off him. He was just doing tricks casually. It's just a masterclass. And at the time, as a little kid, there was a lot of other great number 10s at that tournament, like Laudrup. Platini was still playing. Zico was still playing. Maradona was obviously head and shoulders above a lot of them. He was just sublime.
Yeah. I think the players that you mentioned, Platini and Laudrup, were more kind of languid, weren't they? Whereas Diego was in your face and he was at it. And you see, I mean, that entire 1986 World Cup is a kind of a show reel of Diego Maradona. There was so many things he did, even like the opener against England. It was that activity around the edge of the box that kind of popped that ball up in the air, and then for him to just chase it and do what, but you make your own luck, and he kind of created that confusion, and and off the back of that's where the bigger story unfolded, wasn't it? And what a World Cup. So we've got Diego, and then obviously you mentioned that there's a wind down after 86, isn't there? He still creates moments in World Cup, but they're not necessarily the moments that you'd expect.
No, well, that is the thing that he's got that none of the other players that can compare to him have, is not only the talent, but that charisma and personality, which is obviously part of the cult of Maradona. He said things other footballers wouldn't say. He wasn't afraid of giving his opinion, and his opinion was generally interesting and colourful. He was funny. He was fierce, on the pitch and off it. He had a colourful personal life. Obviously, the stuff that's come out since about the mafia in Gomorrah in Naples just adds to the legend, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But obviously affected him as a player, and I think I wrote a little bit about it in the book. He was having painkilling injections in his ankles from the age of like 17, 18, like consistently. The fact that he managed to perform so level he did for as long as he did is sort of miraculous. But yeah, after the 86 World Cup, he obviously still went on to ridiculous achievements of Napoli, which is kind of just as good as what he did with Argentina, dragging a club that had never won anything to the level they got, and kind of their subsequent success all built on him. If you go to Naples, it's Maradona is everywhere. He's like a saint. It's amazing. But 1990 World Cup, again, he went into it injured, and I remember watching it and being so disappointed because he never really showed his talent except for that one moment against Brazil when he immense defense splitting pass to Caniggia. After Argentina had been absolutely hammered all game, Brazil had hit the bar and the post, and they destroyed Argentina, but couldn't score. Argentina were very dirty, very dogged, very kind of the dark arts. That side of Argentine football was on show. Maradona makes one run, drags like three defenders with him, plays a nutmeg pass. Caniggia beautifully finishes it, and it was like, oh, that's Maradona. He shows up for 1 minute and knocks Brazil out of the tournament. It was only Maradona could do that at that time. I mean, it kind of felt like they're gonna win another World Cup. They're gonna the ugly way all the way to the final. And he was basically playing on one leg, but even in that, he dominated the tournament. The things I remember from the tournament, you couldn't make it different for an England fan or an Italy fan. Maradona swearing at the camera when it pans across his face in Naples.
With the national anthems.
None of those other number 10s would have done that. You know what I mean? And taking it all on his own back, and the fact that Italy hated him and he was happy for Italy to hate him. He kind of knew it to help his team. But yeah, they came up against a really good Germany team in the final, and they couldn't, even though they made it as ugly as possible, and with a one-legged Diego, which wasn't going to happen, was it?
No, it was a very kind of Bilardo kind of based
the ultimate,
Argentina in that World Cup. He was revisiting old territory, wasn't he? Yeah. But then we move on to 94, and we all know what happened there. So I mean, we'll keep that brief, because then we can keep your rolling story about the period after Diego. So 94, we'll talk about that briefly, and then move on to the other kind of great players who've occupied that kind of heavy shirt, should we call it?
Well, 94. The thing about 94 for me as a fan was that was probably the best Argentina side of my lifetime. Like, looking back now, it was amazing. Redondo, maybe the greatest Argentina number 5, one of the greatest defensive midfielders ever, or maybe the best for me. He was an amazing player. He was in that team. You had Batistuta, arguably the greatest number 9, apart from Ronaldo, phenomenal, whoever played in Europe. You know what I mean? An amazing player. Maradona, Sensini. You had like amazing subs around them. Caniggia was kind of at his peak as well. They just looked like they could steamroller anybody. And even when they went out after Maradona had been kicked out of the tournament, it was probably the best game of that tournament against Romania, when they kind of, 2 boxers going hell for leather, in a phone box, punching each other. It was an amazing game. They were a great side. So the way it ended for him just felt really kind of heartbreaking, although it's hard to say that about what happened. But when he was playing, they scored that ridiculous goal against Greece. Remember the ping pong around the edge of the area? Maradona puts it. It was a beautiful goal, kind of an underrated World Cup goal, with the legendary celebration into the camera. When he's screaming, and you could tell there was something not quite right about him.
I think that's what prompted the kind of drug test.
I think it did. I've got a T-shirt of that. It's a great T-shirt, but it's like, anyway. The thing was, in that tournament, in the squad, there was Ortega, a young number 10 who'd already been sort of suggested what might be the new Maradona, one of many. There'd been a few before Ortega who had kind of not really expressed the talent properly and not really come through, probably because Maradona was still around. But Maradona was obviously waning by that point, and Ortega was the next kind of number 10 for Argentina. And it was too early for him, that tournament, but he kind of arrived in the interim, and he was like Maradona in more than one way, you would say.
Yeah, he was, wasn't it? I mean, as you say, 94 left a kind of what Diego left in his wake, a production line of Diego wannabes, but Ariel Ortega was probably the most authentic kind of facsimile of Diego Maradona. Do you want to tell his story in a bit more detail for us, David?
He came through at River Plate, and again, he was like famed from his youth for his dribbling. Like, even if you watch any YouTube highlights of him, he had this really strange dribbling style where he'd slow the ball down under his feet. Zidane used to do something similar, and then he'd be gone. He didn't have much pace, but his ability to manipulate the ball past people was like really strange. So how did he get out of that? He just used to trick his way by people in slow motion, but it was like his full speed, and he could finish like from silly angles. He had his favorite Totti later on, kind of similar. He used to love a chip from outside the box. He'd like see a goalkeeper just a fraction too close to 6-yard liner, and he'd like to chip him. He did it over and over. So I think a personal story, I went to Ireland versus Argentina in Dublin in 97, I think it was. It was Robbie Keane's debut for Ireland, so it was a really big deal, because we all knew this young player was coming through, and he was going to be the next big Irish talent. And Ortega was playing for Argentina, and he was just unplayable. And I knew he was, because my interest in Argentine football, but I hadn't really seen much of him. And he was just the Irish defenders. Ireland had a pretty good defense at the time. We were famed for it. Couldn't get near him. He was like drifting into space, picking holes with passes, dribbling past people at Tom McGrath. The Irish defenders who were pretty good. He was just going by them if they weren't there. It was embarrassing. He made everybody else on the pitch look like they were playing a different game, and that was kind of the most thing. Maradona used to do that. What game is he playing? It's different from me. Ortega had that talent. A really ridiculous, sublime level of talent. But he was flawed. He had substance abuse issues from an early age. He was alcoholic. He came out later in his career, and it kind of affected him, I think, from much earlier than anybody realized. So when he came to a lot of the players we talk about today in the book, when they got to Europe, it kind of exposed them, being away from the kind of bubble of Argentinian football and the Argentinian media. And Ortega came to Europe, and it never really happened for him. At various clubs, Valencia started off well, kind of fell away, didn't get along with Ranieri, his coach. Went to Spain, Italy, started off well, never really happened for him. Eventually ended up in Turkey, Fenerbahce, didn't really happen for him, ended up back in Argentina. So he went back to River Plate, kind of tail between his legs. But again, he went to River Plate and won the Copa Libertadores and had lots of success there, and is an absolute legend in River. So the weird way that we view South American football is not a kid over there. Like, they see success in South America as like a big thing, and a lot of European fans don't even know about it. We'll talk about another player in a bit, but because he didn't succeed in Europe, he's kind of seen as a failure. But he's one of the greatest Argentinian footballers ever. He played at number 10 at a couple of World Cups, scored some amazing goals. He was a great player, especially considering he had this kind of disability, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, our opinion of football is very polarized to Europe, isn't it? And but yeah, like you say, like a magician's got sleight of hand.
Yeah.
Ortega had sleight of foot, didn't he? He was and as well as the chip, I know it's the same from the same kind of box of tricks. He loved the dink as well, like the the dink over the keeper. I think
like
there was one goal.
Weighted.
Yeah, and so it just dropped into the net, and he was quite a player. So he wore the kind of weight of the new Maradona tag quite heavily, didn't he? And there was another player that you listed who suffered the same fate. And who was that, David?
Riquelme. So probably my favorite ever player, weirdly, because just to watch him was always like a pleasure. So Juan Ramon Riquelme, and a lot of football fans of a certain age and football hipsters, I suppose, love Riquelme. He's that kind of player. But when I first heard his name, I was thinking, and he was a number 8 for Argentina at the time, but he was a number 10 at Boca, because Aymar was also emerging at River Plate. And Pablo Aymar was another amazing, beautifully gifted player, brilliant to watch. And they were both coming through as youngsters at the same time. And Aymar was kind of a bit more Maradona-esque in a way, in that he was a scurrying, kind of dribbling, kind of exciting player, whereas Riquelme was more like Pedernera or Bocchini, who played at Independiente before him. He was like no pace, but you get the ball at his feet and he could just slow a game down, dictate the way a defense moved, dictate the way his own players moved, see passes nobody else could see. And he was ridiculously skillful with the ball at his feet. You know, he could shield the ball, he could dribble by people. His way with a back heel and a nutmeg, a cano, they call him in South America, was amazing. He's got some legendary moments. I'm sure you've seen it, where he does a double back heel nutmeg of a River Plate defender in a game for Boca, and it's just everyone was that. And I just love watching him control the game. Just the way he would dictate the pace of a game, dictate the result on a good day. So in Argentina, the concept of the pausa, which is what a playmaker should do. You know, you put your foot on the ball, you wait for the moment to come and you pick the pass. And probably nobody in my lifetime has been better than Riquelme at that. He was just amazing to watch. And probably the first time I ever properly watched him was for Boca against Real Madrid in the Intercontinental Cup final. And Boca had like Palermo up front, and they were a really good Boca team before a lot of them had gone to Europe and River. Or Real Madrid had like the early Galactico area, I suppose. Before they had all of them, but they had like Figo and Makalele and Jeremy and Zidane, and Riquelme absolutely ran the game. He was like untouchable. Like once Boca went in front, he just held onto the ball and drew fouls, and he embarrassed pretty much all the Real Madrid midfield one after another. It was like, who is this player? And based on that, Barcelona bought him. Not just on that, obviously, he was also doing other things. But that game was like, this player looks like he's going to be the next great player. And again, it never quite happened in Europe. But in Argentina, and for Argentina, he was just unbelievable.
Yeah, I think there's still kind of, I mean, especially in the English game, and still a little bit so in the continental European game. There's still this skepticism to put luxury players into your team, and we seem to be escaped that era where you had great creative players. It seems to be kind of disappearing more in the modern era, because it's all about fitness and kind of and teamwork. You don't actually get that individual anymore, or maybe you do in little bits and because we'll go on to talk about a player who was,
No, I agree with you. I think players are so coached, aren't they, nowadays? Kind of that invention and that creativity, that imagination is there in tiny pockets. Like a coach like Guardiola, like drills rigorously, so the players all know what to do. But are they able to create in a way like somebody like Riquelme could, like create magic on his own, or Maradona or Ortega? I don't know. You're right. It's kind of sad if you're kind of an old school romantic football fan. It's something to miss. And so Riquelme, even when he was playing in the late 90s and early 90s in Europe, it was like he was kind of a throwback even then. You know, he seemed like from a different era. He was slower, He was kind of, you said Langeris about Platini. He was kind of, he rolled the ball under his studs. You know what I mean? When he had it, it was like a beautiful thing to watch. If you ever saw him live, it was like, what's he doing with the ball? Nobody else kind of touched it the way he did. It was a wonder. And he came really, like Villarreal, when he finally got a loan to there from Barcelona, where he wasn't really wanted, he kind of brought them to second in the La Liga, and he got them to the semi-finals of the Champions League. Not just him, it was a great team, but he was the main talent. They played around him and to accommodate his gifts, and that was kind of the Riquelme that I'd seen in Argentina, and was like, yeah, that player is just something else. It's kind of a shame no big team ever kind of gave him that platform, like a really big club, you know, and let him do what he could do.
Yeah, because that Boca is renowned by virtually every Boca fan as the greatest ever
Above
Boca
Maradona,
player, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah.
Above
Like
Maradona, above.
that
If you
Messi video of his testimonial, they sing a song about Messi, you're great and all, but Riquelme is our. That shows you how highly they regard him. He's like a yeah, with good reason. He won them a lot of trophies, and he always played like lovely football. And some of his, again, highlight reel from Boca for Riquelme is something beautiful to watch.
Yeah. So, and we move on to the modern era now, past these great players who just kind of, I don't know, it was the wrong place in time for them. I think there's no disputing their talent, but they were just placed in time in the wrong position. And then we have the player that came through who actually put to bed those like 35 years of waiting, didn't we?
Messi.
Yeah.
And from the very start, it was like, he's going to be the new Maradona. It was like, and he was the most likely candidate. He had the most kind of transcendent talent. I remember being in Spain would have been early 90s, and he was on the bench for Barcelona. He hadn't played yet, but the fact that he was on the bench, they kept on showing him on the bench. He was just this young star. He played for the youth team, Barcelona B, but everybody knew who he was because his talent was so widely kind of admired and known. He played for Argentina youth teams. And once he broke through, he was instantly doing things that young players aren't supposed to do. I remember Ronaldinho said, didn't he, I'm not even the best number 10 at Barcelona, when Ronaldinho was probably the best player in the world. And all the signs were there, like he made his debut against Bulgaria, like Maradona had done. He got sent off early on, as Maradona had done. He scored an early handball goal, as Maradona had done. He scored a goal against Getafe for Barcelona, where he did a similar run against England like Maradona. And Argentina, who had been nominating all these players as new Maradona, suddenly had somebody who was like a realistic new Maradona, who looked like he could actually do it. And then there were like 10, 15 years of frustration when he consistently couldn't do it with the Argentina teams he was in. But yeah, finally, obviously, he got there. But I remember we talking about Riquelme and Messi played together. A couple of 2006 World Cup and the 2007 Copa America, and that team in 2007 were like unbelievable to watch. Everybody they played, and Riquelme and Messi playing keep ball, Veron behind, played Mascherano, Crespo, Tevez to come off the bench, players like Gago and Banega in the squad. It was a ridiculously gifted team, and then they got to the final and got beaten by a counter-attacking Brazil. It still hurts me to talk about it. It was Riquelme and Messi. I think Riquelme set up Messi with a beautiful slide rule pass. Messi dinked the keeper against, I think it was Peru. It's a beautiful goal. One of the only times they contribute to a goal together. But that kind of level of talent playing for the same country doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fulfillment of kind of those 35 years in the darkness, wasn't it? But it almost nearly happened, because it happened in the twilight of Messi's career, didn't it? It was but then he won it all after countless heartbreaks. It all came together in 2 years, didn't it? 2 or 3 years.
It was funny writing the book, because you get to the repetitive nature of Messi at a World Cup. You know what I mean? Again, like Maradona, he'd come in often carrying an injury, or in a team that was a bit broken, lacking a few players, a coach that didn't really know how to utilize the talents he had. They were missing a striker, or they had too many players in one position. So they nearly won it in Brazil, when they lost to Germany in the final, and they should have won that final. If Higuain hadn't missed a couple of not easy chances, but chances, if Aguero had been fit, they probably would have won that final. That was the one where you kind of thought Messi's going to do it. Oh no, he's not going to do it. In saying that, he wasn't that great in that tournament. He wasn't as good as he would be later on. And then they had a couple of nightmarish tournaments where they were awful. So in 2022, I'm thinking he's too old. They're not going to do it. But they'd done it in the Copa America the year before, and it was finally they kind of broken that hoodoo. and he had a coach who obviously trusted him and kind of created a team just to play around him and let him do what he could do. And he's sort of, it's been interesting to watch him as a football fan, to watch him learn how to play in spurts and to conserve energy and to go where he was needed. And you'd still see it today from Miami. He does it, doesn't he? He just kind of doesn't play when he needs to. He wanders around the pitch doing nothing, and then suddenly he's created a goal. He scored a ridiculous goal. He did it in the World Cup. I don't think anybody else has ever really done that in a World Cup at that level. To shepherd himself through the tournament and kind of have the players that could do that. So the injection of youth with like the likes of Enzo Fernandez and Julian Alvarez around him to do his running, let him kind of concentrate on what he did best. And I was like, that sublime
play that number 10 square turf in the middle of the pitch and just and bust that bit of space.
There's that thing you watch in a game when he just walks around and you're thinking, what's he doing? So the cliche of him downloading, where the areas are in the pitch, where he can make a difference, and then he does it. He's got the ability to execute it. Like, he's such a ridiculous talent that you rarely see him have a bad game. Like, he'll play okay or well, and people are like, that wasn't great because he hasn't scored a goal, he hasn't assisted a couple of times. His standards are so unbelievably high that when he started to age and not be as productive, it's seen as he's still probably in the top 2 or 3 players in the world at his age. It's unbelievable, really. He's like, I've got a guy on Twitter that I kind of talk about Argentine football, and he's obsessed with the Maradona versus Messi thing. Who's better? It's impossible to tell, isn't it? You can't possibly, because if Maradona was playing today with the modern fitness and modern referees and modern services, who knows? Messi was playing back then. I don't know.
Who knows? Yeah, it was
divine talents. We should be happy we've seen them.
I think for me, it's like I was talking to Stephen Scraggan. He said your favourite things are defined by the timeline of your life, and he's right. So for me, it will always be Maradona, because that was the player that I remember as a kid, and I don't think there'll ever be a player as kind of brilliant as him. But what has to be said about Messi, if you're defining great players, they're players that produce moments that you can't even imagine. Do you know what I mean? There's the Maradona goals against England and Belgium at the '86 World Cup, and there's some of the litany of Messi goals that you actually see for Barcelona and Argentina. I think the only other players that I know in my lifetime who've been able to do that, where you actually go, how did that happen? It was probably Pele and Zidane.
Yeah.
So four players in the history of football, well, in my experience of football, I'm sure there were players before, but there's no video footage of them probably.
Yeah.
But players that I've seen, and they're probably the 4 that give you that WTF moments in games. You know what I mean?
I think I'm too Pele. I've read about and seen. I never saw him play, so I can't really say. But the thing that elevates Messi even above Zidane and Maradona is the consistency. Is just frightening. Like, Cristiano had something similar. Like, they were frighteningly consistent. Like, even when they were going through fallow periods, they're still scoring goals. They're still contributing assists. And Messi, he's just been probably more consistent at a higher level than anybody in the history of football. Like, but you've got to say that. And you're right, he did things where you're like, what was that? Like, that thing in Argentina is that Messi's not human, he's an alien, because he does impossible things. And you watch the game. My son has just really gotten football properly. So the 2022 World Cup was his first World Cup. He's like 11 during it, and he kind of come to expect Messi to do something impossible. I'm like, this is not normal. Players don't do this. Even the great players don't. He does it every game.
That's it. This doesn't happen all the time. Having to tell you, this doesn't happen all the time. This is
it's
completely
special.
unique. And what a World Cup for it to be your first. That final was just an incredible game of football. One of the best games I've ever. You kind of lose this love of football sometimes in your life, and then there's something happens like that kind of restores it immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. And Messi's been like that. I think for a lot of people, it's hard not to like him. He's not got Maradona's charisma or the personality. He just comes on and does his job. His job is creating wonderful football, and he does it so well and so consistently. Watching with him, I was like, he's done it again. Game after game, he did it. And it is an amazing thing. So for Argentina, who were waiting for that, somebody to come along and do that, for it to be him and to do it in such amazing, beautiful fashion, what did feel like the end of a kind of a long quest.
Yeah, and what it has done, I mean, it's created a legacy, but it's going to be a difficult one for somebody to kind of cake on, isn't it? What do you think the future holds for kind of anybody
funny
trying
thing in
to
Argentina is that they pump out number 10s though.
yeah,
There is a production line. It is a really kind of self-aware football culture. You know, they're obsessed with their own football culture and history and the mystique and so they create number 10s, number 5s, but number 10s in particular. So a player who's got a good range of pass and a good dribbler will be kind of sculpted to be a number 10. So they constantly have, there's a low level. If you watch Argentine football, every squad more or less will have at least one young number 10. You're like, oh, he's the one that's going. And a lot of them will end up in the MLS or in Mexico or playing in Chile. They won't quite be that, but all it takes is one or two of them to get to the Argentinian national team, and some of them will end up in Europe. So in the book, we've mentioned a few today, but there's like 12, 13 other players we'll talk about in great detail who've like gone to Europe and kind of failed, or gone to Europe and succeeded in some level. And Argentina keeps on producing them. So you got Thiago Almada at the moment, Atlanta in the MLS. He's probably the kind of most obvious success. He's a number 10. He's short. He's creative. He scores ridiculous goals, and he's gone to MLS as a way to get him ready to come to Europe, I think. And he was in the squad in 2022. He came on a couple of times, so he's kind of been around Messi and seeing. He's the kind of the most obvious. But there are some youngsters in Argentina, I'm sure. I haven't been watching as much this season, but will come through who will be like, oh, he's the next Messi, because they've already started that. Well, Messi was a youngster. They were already talking about the new Messi. So it's moved on from Maradona, now it's Messi.
That's right, yeah. So it's created a whole new kind of the new Messi culture. But as you say, mate, your book, you've only barely touched on everyone else in the book. But so what I would suggest to everyone, I've read the book, and it's a brilliant read. You've done a fantastic job, mate. Really impressed. But could you tell everyone where it's available so they can go out and buy this fantastic book?
It's called Big Boots to Fill. It's available from Pitch, who are the publishers. You can get it on Amazon, Waterstones, Blackwell's. It's available in most high street bookshops. I've seen it, which is a nice thing. But yeah, it's out in hardback, and you can get it on Kindle as well.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah. Honestly, mate, congratulations. You've done a great job.
Thanks, mate.
Yeah, no problem. Guys, thank you for joining us. David, thank you for joining us this evening. And we'll hopefully you've got another book in you, and we'll look forward to that one in the future. We can come back, have another chat about that. So guys, join me next time on Football Geeks, where we'll be talking with more fantastic football people. See you next time.
Thank you.